Fantastic. Welcome back, everyone. I see there are some familiar faces from our last session, so it's great that you stayed. So sorry for repeating myself, but I'm Daisy Chapman-Chamberlain, Rail Services Lead at Rail North Partnership, which is the statutory body that oversees rail investment and innovation in the north of England. And we have a fantastic panel here today who are going to introduce themselves to talk about a topic which I know is at the forefront of everybody's mind, funding and GBR. So we are going to have Q&A later. Please hold your questions to the end. But for now, we will be kicking off with a really good discussion from our panel around those funding priorities. And the first funding period is fast approaching. It will be here before we know it, bringing, of course, significant change to the rail industry and to the supply chain. And to succeed, suppliers, such as many of you in the room, will need a clear line of sight on the priorities that will shape safety, performance, and reliability over the coming years. So this session brings together industry leaders to explore the opportunities of funding period one, including the wider expectations around social value, sustainability, and creating a safe, respectful workplace. So, how can suppliers get ahead with funding period one, align to emerging priorities, and add long-term value? And the speakers here today will help us to understand the key focus areas for the industry and what preparation looks like now. So without further ado, I will hand straight over to Mark Killick, Managing Director of Wales and Western at Network Rail.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Are you having a good day? Excellent, excellent. How many came on the train directly from Paddington? Was it on? It was on time. I came on that train too. Well, it was a little bit late, but anyway, it's a great way to get here and bringing us straight into this wonderful event. And I've had a fantastic morning already, walking around and talking to so many people who are doing such exciting things. And it's just great to see the level of support that we have across making the rail industry happen. And I can really feel the buzz around this place today, and I'm sure you feel the same. And it's just great to have the opportunity to bring so many of our key suppliers from across the industry together to really galvanise around what we need to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the next funding period, FP1 as it's called, and as we move towards GBR, what's going to be different. And just some reflections on how we're learning from CP7. Obviously, we've still got a way to go in terms of CP7, but we're already looking to the next funding period as well. So they're the three things I'm going to cover, and there'll be plenty of time for questions later on. So I guess it's just worth firstly setting the context. So we've got a once-in-a-generation change to the rail industry. GBR is coming, and it's very, very close. And it does represent a significant opportunity for the industry to come together, bringing track and train together into one place. And that will really help unlock a number of things which will help the industry, making those whole system decisions. And I'll give a few examples of where I'm already seeing that happen as we start in the early stages of integration. It also gives us the opportunity to really look at how we grow our markets, so how we grow passenger and freight markets, and ultimately how we grow revenue to make the industry more sustainable. And really, in all of that, focusing on the customer and making sure we focus on what those outcomes will be. Because as an industry, we need to be more affordable to taxpayers, and by growing revenue and looking at how we do things differently, that will give us the opportunity to drive that long-term sustainability. So I mentioned some of those early things that we're seeing. So we've got some integrated railways already across the network. In my previous role, I worked closely with South Eastern Railway and South Western Railway, who are two of the first railways to create that integrated team, with Anglia Railway following on more recently. And in Wales and Western, my own region, Great Western Railway will come into public ownership in December this year, and then we will look to create an integrated railway. But many of those benefits, where putting a single team in charge of both track and train just allows things to be unlocked that perhaps before, because what we're doing is we're aligning incentives, we're making one person accountable, and actually often they've got to make those trade-offs. And a lot of what we would do in the railway going forward will be about making trade-offs, but we'll put the right structure which will really enable that to be more effective. aligning incentives and making sure that we're making whole system decisions that are absolutely centred in customers. So how will FP1 be different to previous control periods? So as I mentioned, it's the first time for a long time that we've brought together a plan that picks up both track and train. It's going to be really focused around outcomes, linking in not only with passengers and freight, but also with government ambitions and mayoral strategic authorities. So as we move towards GBR, we're already thinking about how do we plan differently, how do we plan with the whole system in mind. And we know that rail plays a really key role in the government's priorities. So we're a railway for a purpose. We deliver economic growth, job skills, connectivity. And I've been really excited coming to Wales and Western to see some of that opportunity which is being supported by the railway, where we're building new stations, introducing new service groups, and providing new journey opportunities that will do all of those things around supporting housing, driving economic growth. And we're seeing that in the Bristol area, in my region, in Cornwall, in Wales, and it's really exciting to be a part of that and support that wider economy. And I think for the railway, sometimes we get a little bit absorbed in ourselves as a railway industry and think, it's the railway for the railway's sake. But when you stand back and you see the opportunity that the railway creates, it's really powerful. And I often challenge myself and my team to stop and reflect on that and just recognise what we do is pretty amazing. So what do we know about FP1? So we're quite early in our thinking on FP1, but it's good that we're starting early. It's good that we're thinking about FP1 from an early stage as an integrated track and train plan. But we mustn't kid ourselves. We know that funding is going to be tight. The competition for public funds is quite extreme at the moment. So we have to be realistic around what that will look like. So our funding, when you actually stand back and look at it from an industry perspective, is a huge amount of money, but we've got a huge amount to deliver with that money. So money will be tight, so that needs to challenge us to think about how we do things differently and make sure we get the maximum out of every pound that we invest. And it's been great today to talk to a few people on various stands and think about some of the technology and the innovation that's being delivered. But one of the things that has sort of resonated with me is that on a couple of occasions, there's some great thinking. It's whether there has actually really been any engagement at the moment with Network Rail on those products. And some of these products are quite well developed. I think there is a point around making sure that there is that early engagement around sort of key requirements that we have as a business. And also recognising that funding is going to be tight. There might be loads of stuff that we really want to do, but actually we're going to have to be quite focused in where we spend our money and making sure we're spending our money in the areas which deliver the best possible outcomes for the railway. So I think early engagement between SMEs that are developing things to understand what we need and also what our priorities are as Network Rail is going to be key to make sure that we're collectively putting our efforts into the things which we're going to be able to fund and are going to deliver that better railway. One area that is really going to be key and continues to be key is around the performance of our assets. Our assets are getting older. We will renew some of them, but we're more and more moving towards a life extension strategy and doing things, clever, innovative things to make our assets perform better, even though they're getting older. And that's fixed assets, but that equally applies to trains and rolling stock. And I was down in Devon and Cornwall a couple of weeks ago visiting teams, and it was great to see on the Newquay branch where we've brought together an old lever frame signal box and modern axle counter technology, and the teams have worked both from a technical and an operational viewpoint to bring those two technologies together and make them work together, which I think is fantastic, because in reality, if we'd said, well, we need to replace the whole system, it just would have become unaffordable. So how we blend old and new technology together, I think is going to be key as we move forward in subsequent control periods. The other reflection from CP7 is that we want to have a much more stable work bank. The level of change within our work banks across the network in this control period has been really challenging, and we have learned some lessons from that. That's been difficult for us in Network Rail, but I know it's also been difficult across our supply chain. So as we think about FP1, how do we make sure that we build a stronger position? I've mentioned delivering value for money. That's going to continue to be something that we absolutely need to focus on, and trade-offs remain to be that thing that we're going to have to manage. Often we have to pick the least worst option when we're thinking around what we don't do. But by using technology, by monitoring things rather than necessarily replacing them, we will drive a more reliable railway. We know that for an ambitious, reliable railway, we are going to need more investment, but we need to be really clear that that investment is driving value. And that's one of the benefits of a whole system approach. We're looking at the revenue and the social value that those interventions will make, particularly when we're talking about enhancing our railway and offering new opportunities for people. And to do that, we need to build a really strong evidence base that shows those trade-offs and shows that for the pound that we're spending, it really is the best value. So as we move forward into from CP7 into FP1, we want to be really sort of open and engage early. We're starting this process early. We're starting it as a whole industry approach, and we want to do it in partnership with the industry. Today is, just an absolute reminder that there's so much great thinking out there, and if we work together and we think about what our priorities are, how can all of our supply chain support us in delivering those outcomes that we all want and make GBR a real success. So I'll stop there. There's an opportunity to ask some questions, and I'll now hand over to Julie, who's going to talk a little bit about sustainability.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Mark. So I'm just going to say a few words about sustainability with a view to the next funding period. And I'll kick off talking about carbon and the journey to net zero. So within Control Period 7, Network Rail, we've been pretty focused on our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, so our operational emissions for carbon. A lot of our metrics and our measures are all kind of focused on that. But actually, that's only a few percent of the pie chart, with a third being traction, and then 2/3 being in our supply chain. So massive opportunity there to really do something different in FP1. And a lot of it goes hand in hand with some of what Mark's been saying about extending the life cycle of assets, because that's much more sustainable than replacing them. There's lots of innovation, as we've seen here today, within the infrastructure sector as a whole and within rail, and we're absolutely keen to take advantage of that. But those first steps of decarbonising are, do we need to do it at all? Can we life extend? And then if we do need to do it, then how can we be innovative, and how can we really minimise what we're building? And how do we give it longevity? Longevity, which I heard from Shanice earlier, is absolutely key in making sure that we reduce the whole life carbon of what we're doing. And then another key word for you, modularity. So if we can build things that are modular, then if something needs replacing, we don't need to replace the whole thing. So those are some key things to take away. And one final one on that is remote monitoring. So if we can have assets that we can remotely monitor, we don't need to make journeys to site. That helps reduce our carbon emissions. It also improves safety and efficiency. Moving on to social value. I think there's been some fantastic work in the supply chain on social value, use of local resources, apprenticeships, which are incredibly powerful way of improving social mobility, Accessibility is another one. So if we think of our Access for All programme, it's not just about putting lifts in bridges at stations. If we think of those three words, access for all, we want to be thinking about all people and how do we make journeys easy for them on our network. It's people with reduced mobility, but there's also people with other disabilities as well that we need to make journeys easy for them. So turning to biodiversity net gain, we're stewards of wildlife corridors at Network Rail, really, really important asset. So we want to be working with the environment and not in spite of it. Valuing nature is something that we're really trying to change our culture to do. So it's trying to find that balance between, keeping a safe and reliable network, but still retaining the benefits of the biodiversity. And one of those is cooling and shading. And the last few years have certainly been a heat wave at Rail Live. And last year, our sustainability stand, which is Dr. Neil Strong, who's our biodiversity lead in Network Rail, brings loads of trees with him. And that was an absolute magnet last year for everybody just trying to get there, trying to stay cool. So that just illustrates that biodiversity gives you a cooling impact. And with changing climate, that's something that we need to be doing for our customers and for our colleagues as well, is making it bearable in those increasingly extreme heat days. So just finally then a few words about climate resilience. Obviously we don't want to be putting in any assets that are not resilient to the climate that they need to withstand in their lifetime. But we also need to be thinking about how are they going to be maintained? Are they situated in somewhere where that floods so people can't access them? Or, we need to be making sure that we can get access if we need it in extreme weather. And also thinking about whole system resilience, so not just the resilience of our infrastructure, but also passengers and how do we keep them comfortable and safe in extreme weather. And the value of reliability. So if we have a resilient rail network, we have a reliable network, that increases public confidence, increases modal shift, has an impact on our net move to net zero, improving economic growth, and then the growth of rail. So it's all interlinked, and I think we recognise the value of being proactive in delivering climate resilience, because then we save a lot of costs and a lot of damage reputationally. But it's trying to find the places where we need to focus that funding. So I'm just going to finish with an advert before I hand over to Elliot. So in Wales and Western, we have a group called Whisper with our supply chain around innovation, safety and sustainability, and there's working groups around both social value and sustainability. So please do get involved, those of you that aren't already, if you're working on Wales and Western. And then there's a greener railway hub as well that you can access to with lots of sustainability information on it. And I'm going to hand over now to Elliot.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to now talk about what Network Rail are doing to prevent discrimination and harassment. And I've been fortunate enough that I've been given a little bit of extra time, so I'm going to try and make it a little bit interactive. So have we got a roaming mic at all? Perfect. My name is Elliot Judge. My background isn't rail. For the last 4 or 5 years, I've been working in NHS England, and also universities to support them to prevent sexual harassment and racism from occurring. And then on the occasions that it does happen, making sure that they respond in a trauma-informed and caring way. Prior to that, I was a cop. One of the roles I had as Detective Chief Superintendent was to lead the command that investigated all serious sexual crimes, investigated hate crimes, and we also work with sex offenders in the community to try to prevent them from committing further harm. So why am I here in Network Rail with that background? Well, I've been asked to come in, or I was asked to come in to look at the state of sexual harassment specifically, but other types of hate as well. I was very fortunate enough to be supported by colleagues in Wales and Western, but also across the business, and for them to give me their insight on the prevalence of sexual harassment. And what I found was there's absolutely no difference in the rail industry to policing, to the NHS, to universities, and in fact, in any industry. Sexual harassment and other forms of discrimination and harassment are societal issues that will bleed into any organisation. And if we want change, we all need to stand together and educate. I genuinely believe that most harassment, sexual harassment, not so much others, is because people aren't aware of how their behaviour, their comments, their hug impacts people. And if we want to make sure we eradicate some of this behaviour, we need to educate. So education is absolutely key. And if you come over to the sexual harassment stand, we can show you some of the education that's in place at the moment. Certain incidents of sexual harassment and discrimination are predictable. Certain locations, certain vulnerable groups are more likely to be subjected to this behaviour than others. So as an organisation and as an industry, we know this information, what are we doing about it, how are we supporting those, how are we educating people that their behaviour might not be wanted. That starts with conversations. People told me why they thought sexual harassment occurs. And it occurs for a whole host of reasons. But they also told me why they perhaps wouldn't report those types of incidents if they were subjected to it. So I'm going to ask you as a crowd of not just Network Rail, why do you think people may not report incidents of sexual harassment when it occurs? I heard nothing gets done. Shame. Yeah. What else?
Fear.
Fear of what?
Of having to relive the experience when kind of bring it back to talk about it.
Absolutely.
Over here. Just here.
Being made to feel that they're the one that's caused the incident.
Absolutely, yeah. Any others? Lady over here?
Just here.
Just, lady.
Your hand back up. There we go.
I think people might not believe them.
Absolutely. Any more thoughts?
Sometimes people don't understand that this is sexual harassment and then realize it years later. So at that moment, they don't realize what's going on.
Absolutely. There are themes that come out time after time, and once again I'll say and make a really important point, this isn't unique to Network Rail. People don't report these types of incidents because they think, who is going to believe me? This person that's responsible hasn't done it in front of witnesses. This person that's responsible hasn't told anybody about it. There's no CCTV. They're senior, they're popular, they're experienced. Who's going to believe me? People also, like the lady said over there, have a lack of trust that the organisation they work for will do something about it. Perhaps they have raised concerns previously, or someone has a reputation for this type of behaviour, or maybe even different types of behaviour, and that wasn't listened to in the way that they thought it should have been. Often as well, this thing that is very personal to somebody, that significantly impacted their well-being, and what should be a private incident is now being discussed openly by people. And of course, when they are discussed, those stories get embellished, and all of a sudden something that was once very private to somebody is now subject of gossip. It hasn't come up today, but I hear this perhaps in organisations more than any other reason for not reporting, is I'm worried that if I raise this concern, I'm going to suffer detriment. I'm going to be seen as the bad person that's potentially made something up when it wasn't true, when actually it is true. Because if I have sexually harassed somebody and someone raises a concern, I'm probably not likely to say, the reason I'm under investigation, if it's gone to that position, is because I've been sexually harassing this person and they've made a complaint. What often is said is, be careful, watch them, they've made this false allegation up against me. If you're not careful, you could have the same allegation made about you. And people genuinely fear that. If I raise this, this is going to dampen my opportunities for progression for a role that I was after. Often victims will blame themselves as well. I remember having the privilege of working with lots of survivors of serious sexual harm, and they'll say, Elliot, some of this was my fault. I knew there was no lights down that alleyway. I knew I should have gone the long way where it was safer. And of course, that's not the case. But it's really common. Have I done something or said something to make that person believe that this behaviour was wanted? So having a good understanding of all of these things, Network Rail have put in place a number of things to try to prevent things from occurring. A policy. There's more than just a policy. Actually, it's an absolute commitment to try to eradicate this type of behaviour. We're providing training to absolutely everybody, not just an e-learning where you click the buttons, but actually conversations throughout the organisation. Because I think when you start to hear people's views, maybe their experiences, it's a really good way to upskill your knowledge. We also undertook a review, and this is not just Network Rail. When I review cases and investigations, we don't always do the best by our victims, we don't always do the best by our witnesses, and we don't always do our best by the person that's had the allegation made against them. Some of the way that we phrase the questions can have a significant impact on the person that we're speaking to. Unintentional questions or impact of questions aren't always realised. So I'll give you a really good example. Are you sure the person knew that your advances weren't welcome? What that question is likely to do is make that person think, am I being blamed for this? This person doesn't understand what they're investigating, and actually I'm going to close down and be much less vulnerable than I was going to be when I had trust. If you don't get a full account of what's happened, then it's unlikely that the investigation is going to end up with the truth outing. So being really mindful and trauma-informed and realising that everything you say as an investigator, everything you do as an investigator will have an impact both to victims, witnesses and perpetrators. So we're teaching that now. There's a whole host of things that we're doing, and the videos that you'll see over there, if you'd like to come over, talk about making it really clear what sexual harassment is. That actually you can not intend it to be sexual harassment, but if it's perceived that way, it's sexual harassment. It breaches the Equality Act. Employers have a responsibility now under the Worker Protection Act to anticipate this behaviour occurring and then take all reasonable steps to prevent it. So reflect, if you will, what are your organisation doing to make sure people are coming to work and being safe, feeling respected and not being subjected to this type of behaviour. Now, often people can think when I talk, is this banging men over the head for their behaviour? This happens to women, this happens to men, it's perpetrated by women, it's perpetrated by men. Yes, women are disproportionately affected. In fact, anyone with a protected characteristic is disproportionately affected. Network Rail, as you'll be aware, is very much a male-orientated organisation. So statistics, if you were to ask every person that had been subjected to this type of behaviour to come forward, there'd be around the same number of people, men and women. But of course, with there being much less women in the organisation, women are disproportionately affected. In fact, women under the age of 28 are disproportionately affected. So when we look at vulnerable groups, our graduates, our year in industry, our trainees, they're all people that we need to be working with to let them know this behaviour isn't tolerated in the industry. This behaviour, if you experience it, we want to know about it and we want to make sure you're safe so we can deal with it and support it. Now, the other important thing to say is we are going to make mistakes and we are going to get it wrong. So not every time someone says something or does something does it need to be, in my view, a full investigation. Twice last year, I've got a 19-year-old daughter. I made a comment and she said, Dad, you're supposed to be the sexual harassment expert and you've just said that. I'm like, what are you talking about? So she said, you made this comment. Yeah, what's wrong with that? So she tells me, and I said, oh, darling, as a 53-year-old man, that means something very different to me. I'm sorry, I won't say it again. And I don't say it again. So I think it's okay to make mistakes. I don't think it's acceptable to keep making mistakes. And certain types of behaviour, absolutely, it needs to be dealt with in a different way. I think that's it, 'cause I've really welcomed some questions. So we've got about 14 minutes left. But please, 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 come over to the stand over in the network rail. Come and have a listen to what we're doing. Reflect on what your own organisation's doing. And it will be great. My vision, to have an industry standard of training, have an industry standard of one policy. If you want to report an incident of sexual harassment, there's one number that you ring, or there's one place you go online. I want everybody to come to work knowing that if you are subjected to this inappropriate behaviour or any discrimination or harassment, that it's not a postcode lottery. That you're going to be treated the same. That treatment is going to be respectful, mindful of what's happened to you. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you so much. 3 really informative presentations there. We will have some Q&A now, so if you would like to ask a question, please make sure that you pop your hand up for the microphone. When the microphone does come to you, please make sure that you introduce yourself with your name and your organisation. However, I'm going to use the chair's prerogative and take the first question, which, Mark, I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
Just because I know everyone in the room is thinking it. You said about the early engagement piece being really important for suppliers and SMEs. How does that early engagement work in practice? So how do suppliers in this room actually now reach out to be part of that early engagement?
So it's a really good question, and one I've been reflecting on as I've been having discussions today. And I think there are various places that can happen. We've got our product acceptance team that are here, have got a stand. And also the people who are prepared to sponsor some of these innovations, both in regions, in routes, and in the centre of Network Rail. But one of the things I've been reflecting on today is that clear enough? And is there a way that we can strengthen that? We are starting the discussion for FP1. We're starting it now. We're starting it, a good way out. And I think events like this today, where there's opportunity to chat to folk from Network Rail, but also some of the innovation events that we're running, are all ways that we can start to have those conversations around what are the priority areas for the business, for the railway in the next funding period, and how can particularly our supply chain SMEs get behind our priorities and help come up with better and innovative ways of delivering those improvements.
Thank you. Well, anything from the audience? This gentleman here.
Thank you. David Anderson, once of the University of Warwick. A plea for level boarding, please. I'm thinking particularly of the newly rebuilt station at the University of Birmingham and the newly introduced cross-city trains, particularly northbound. The count of the track is such that the gap between the train and the platform has become so wide that my wife, who is reasonably able, cannot in fact safely get off the train, and so has to go into New Street, where there's still a gap, but not quite as bad as at the university station, and then come out again on the train where the southbound train will be counted towards the platform. So please, here's new rolling stock, a newly rebuilt station, and the gap going northbound is horrendous.
Would you like to pick that up?
Yeah, so I'm happy to pick that up. So I absolutely agree. It's we've got such a legacy of infrastructure and rolling stock. The level boarding is something. It's absolutely an area that we're sort of focusing on. I think I'm encouraged by some of the recent introduction of some of the rolling stock that have introduced things like ramps, which are automatically deployed. Some of the Stadler units, for example, which I think is a great step forward. But it's an area we absolutely need to do more on. And where that's not possible, making sure we've got the right collective industry support to help people on and off the train. It's something I've always been passionate about. My 21-year-old daughter now uses the wheelchair, and I see firsthand how she struggles to use the network. So it is absolutely an area that, both from a sort of physical infrastructure, we need to focus on and looking at innovative solutions, but also we need to make sure that we have a whole industry focus on assisting people as they're using our network if the infrastructure doesn't yet meet that sort of self-service effectively. But it's a really good point, and one as an industry we need to continue to drive forward through the next control period and subsequent funding periods.
Absolutely. Merseyrail's 777 fleet is a really fantastic example of where that regional collaboration can enable full level boarding. And I think now it's about how do we apply that into the future of GBR. Yeah. Anything else from the audience? I think you were first, right at the back.
Babak Afani, Network Rail. Looking to FP1 then, and the more integrated railway. Our current industry structure has been accused of sometimes prioritising our own organisations over the sort of outcome requirements that Mark talked about for passengers. So going into FP1, how do we make sure it's not just written down policies and org charts that are integrated and thinking about passengers, but the culture, the behaviours, the mindset of our people that is really putting those outcomes for passengers first?
So happy to take that. So I agree. It's not just about the organisation; it is about how we think. GBR is going to be a huge organisation, and for a lot of people, their sort of day-to-day role won't change. If they maintain the track or they maintain rolling stock. But actually, we want people to think differently about how the organisation works. The fact that the organisations are thinking whole system, and particularly from a Network Rail perspective, making sure that we make sure that everybody, irrespective of their role, can see that line of sight around how they are supporting outcomes for customers. And I think in some places we already do that really well, but there are other parts of the industry that perhaps we don't, and other teams where perhaps people don't recognise the contribution they're making. So I think continuing to really talk about that and making sure that everybody, and it's something that people who have worked in my teams always know I talk about, is that I want everybody to be able to see that line of sight, and that applies to people who are part of our supply chain as well. How is what you and your team are doing, how is that ultimately helping us support outcomes for customers and freight? And if you can see that alignment, and it goes back to what I said earlier about making sure everybody's clear on our priorities and how we get behind that, then I think we'll be in a much better place. I think the structure of the industry going forward will help that, but it won't do it on its own. We've got to make sure we have those conversations right throughout the whole organisation with teams, and make sure that people are thinking about how their work is affecting customer outcomes.
We had a question in the middle somewhere here, just here. Oh, well, that, and then we'll come over to you.
Yeah, Emma Porter from Story Contracting. I think what my question is kind of around confidence and the impact that confidence has on investment. So with things like GBR, I think the whole industry recognised the potential improvements GBR could bring, but the detail is still slow in coming out, and conversations today feels like there's a bit of a lack of confidence that it's going to be ready for 2027. And with devolution also changing the landscape, and I think possibly compounded by the start of CP7 being such a slow start and feeling really tough in the supply chain. My question is, what can we do to kind of give the supply chain and give private companies that confidence? Because if there's confidence, private businesses will invest. Businesses like Stories, we will invest in plant and skills and infrastructure and innovation, but only if we're confident that it's going to actually materialise. So I think understanding kind of how can we give that confidence that what we think the spend's going to be and what we think the priorities are actually going to happen, because I think there's quite a lack of confidence in the industry for various reasons, and some of those reasons I'm on board with. I love GBR. I think we should get on with it, but in the meantime, while we're waiting, it's definitely dampening businesses, private sector's confidence to invest money. So yeah, how do we fix that?
So I think it's a really great question, and recognise that the start of CP7 has been slow. There's been lots of pressure on the funding that we've had, and things like inflation have really taken a hit. So as I said sort of earlier, I think one of the things we need to make sure we do is have a plan which doesn't change as much. Now, that's easy to say, much harder to do, but there are lessons that we've taken from how we've planned for CP7 and how do we build those through, because the stability of Workbank is really helpful for Network Rail or for GBR in the future, but it's also really helpful and making sure that it's realistic and we're communicating in a clear way. And that's how we want to sort of build the plans together with that support, being really clear about what our outcomes are and where we're going to be spending money. Because I think we also have to be honest to say there are some things that might be nice to do, but if they're not the things we're focusing on and the things that are going to likely get the funding, then we don't want people investing time in things which perhaps at the moment, certainly for the next period or so, aren't going to fly.
In the middle. Hand up, please. There we go.
Karen Pacho from Truvale TD. Following on from getting a clearer picture of what is likely to be funded, especially having heard that carbon zero is one of the priorities. Do you guys have more detail on the sort of ideal projects that GBR is looking to realise and give funding to during FP1? With a focus on
carbon?
Sustainability and carbon zero.
I can take that. So I think it's about when we're looking at the majority of our spend will be in our asset renewal kind of program, and so it's not kind of sustainability projects per se. It's building those kind of low carbon solutions into our work bank. So, track renewals, re-signallings, also our enhancement program, so new stations and things. It's about looking at the opportunity. And I think data is absolutely key for this. So really understanding where the carbon is, so getting that proper assessment done, and then that drives the right opportunities and finding out where we can really reduce it. But before all of that, then there's what I said about just do we need to do the work at all, and is there something we can do around longevity and asset lifetime as well?
So would you say right now that FP1 is kind of looking first towards scoping the landscape, not yet into realising those solutions?
Yeah, so I think from where the sustainability world is coming from, it's about where are we going to, what are our outputs going to be, what are our targets going to be, and so I'd like that to move away from, well, not away from our operational emissions, but to also include the big opportunity in our kind of supply chain. So yeah.
Unfortunately, we are very nearly out of time, so I will take the final question. And I'd like to ask Elliot, what can we do as individuals in the room to address and prevent sexual harassment?
So educate yourself. Is that working?
Ooh, I think it is now.
Perfect. So take time to understand what sexual harassment is. I think if we're all honest, we probably have made comments, walked by behaviours, not challenged behaviours. I certainly have. So if you acknowledge that and you want to see a change happen, you are all accountable and have a role to play. So reflect on your behaviours. If you see it, challenge in a safe way at the time afterwards. Make sure the person that's been subjected to the behaviour is okay. But I think the first thing is to start talking about it. We've started that today, perhaps first time for many. And if we can do that, we can realise that it's okay to make mistakes. We'll create a much safer environment for people to come to work to.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for such an engaging and detailed panel. Can we have a round of applause for the speakers, please? And thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope to see you in the next session, which is all about the growth of international rail. Thank you.